Welcome to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You knew that because you're smart, and also it's the name of the show. As I continue to experiment with new tech in this office, we're starting out a Friday, a fun Friday, a fantastic Friday, 7 minutes late today. It's just, I'm running on Russ Joy time. All right, RJT, Russ Joy time. But a big hello and a big welcome to everyone who's checking in over on YouTube at The Russ Joy Show, over on YouTube at Joy Media, LLC. Those of you who are tuning in via X at Joy on Broad, and those of you, who are checking in on Facebook on the Joy Media page as well. Apparently, you can't just create a page on Facebook anymore and live stream. Now there's criteria you have to meet. So the Russ Joy page will eventually get there. But the Russ Joy Show page will eventually stream to there as well. But in the meantime, we're just making do. But it's a beautiful Friday. The reason it's a beautiful Friday is because there's a lot to talk about. Sometimes I've gone to jump on this show and I've had to actually think about it a little bit. I've had to kind of mull over, what the hell do I talk about today? How far do I get into something? And is there enough to actually put together a real episode? Today happens to be one of those days because, it doesn't. Today is actually a day that there are so many things to talk about, and we have to get them in a pretty compact time frame. I've got a meeting for work or something that got added because our company has people in Cyprus and the UK and all out west and everything. So time zones aren't a thing. I digress. Let's get into a few things. Obviously, two of the biggest topics for today both revolve around your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers. That's where we'll start. We will get to Joel Embiid a little bit later because he had some very interesting comments on the Drew Hanlon show. And if you're like, hey, wait a second, wasn't Drew Hanlon the guy that we all kind of mocked because of his making excuses for Markelle Fultz? Wasn't he Markelle Fultz's trainer? He was. But he's also Joel Embiid's trainer. He's also Jason Tatum's trainer. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Not bad at all. We'll get to Joel Embiid a little bit later, plus some training camp thoughts. And we've already gotten to experience the thing that I hate the most, the play-by-play of training camp. Also, the people who are making it seem like they're at training camp, but actually aren't. We'll get to all of that, and maybe even more, later in today's episode. But I'm going to go out to the comments first, which is where we like to start the show. Andrew Fawcett says, good morning, all. I'm off today and could be sleeping in, but had to be here for this one. Andrew, I appreciate you tremendously. Truly, I do. Joe Papel, shouting at Andrew. They just a nice back and forth going because last night we dropped an episode of Snow the Goalie, myself, Ant, and Bundy. And these guys are always in the comments. They're always in the comments. And it's loving. It's caring. It's part of the Snow the Goalie community. And they decided, against their better judgment, to find their way over to this show as well. Peter, good morning, over on YouTube. Hunter Mikos over on YouTube, good morning. Who else is excited for the best NHL team and the most exciting team in Philly to make a run this year? Hunter must have hit in his head. Mama called the doctor, and the doctor said, no more Hunter watching hockey highlights on the bed. All right, and a good morning to Nico as well. All right, let's get into it today. So there are two topics, and like I said, we dropped a Snow the Goalie last night. I didn't get to kind of give my full thoughts on two things that happened. One is Matvei Michkov coming stateside, and the other one, of course, is Travis Konecny's extension. Now, I said I didn't get to give my full thoughts because it's part of the beauty and the curse of running a 3-man booth on a show is that you can't really give everything. You can't really go as full into detail when you have to try to play off 2 other people. And as some dude on Twitter said yesterday, the other 2 are the ones that people care about the opinions of. Mine are mostly irrelevant. And I kind of agree with that sometimes. But I want to get into it a little bit more because I had some more thoughts and I kind of slept on it and I thought about the Konecny extension and I thought about Michkov coming over and the way that the team's marketing him. And I'm not going to backtrack at all, but I think I am going to go a little bit deeper into what I said. So let's start with Matvei Michkov. Let's start with a little bit of positivity before we get negative. Or do I start with negative and then go positive? Or maybe negative's really not even going to be that negative. Let's start with Michkov. So the Flyers did a really good job the other day of putting together what I would say was very smart social media work on their part, when they announced that Matvei Michkov had arrived in the U.S. There had been a lot of rumors going into this week that he was potentially going to be coming in. Kevin Kurz over at The Athletic has been on top of the story. And the idea had been thrown out there that Michkov could be coming stateside as early as a few days ago. And then it obviously sparked this whole big thing about like, all right, if he's coming over, is he going to be a PHL? Like, is he going to be coming into Philly International? And if so, what does that mean? Are we going to have people out there to go meet him and greet him? Is Johnny Airports, John Clark going to be there to meet him? And then at one point, I actually got word that he wasn't flying into Philly International. He was going to fly into JFK because they have more international flights, more comfortable international flights. There's a better variety or whatever. So I was like, all right, fine. So we get word that morning, Michkov is landing. He's going to be here. Everybody prepare yourself, gird your loins. Everybody get ready for what's about to unfold. And so if you were waking up a little bit late a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, you woke up to this tweet from the Flyers sharing the good news. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. And there he is, Matvei Michkov, stateside. And the interesting thing that was noted in the introductory press conference is he wasn't wearing a Flyers hat when he landed. No, he was wearing a Phillies hat. Is he pandering already? Has he gone to the Bryce Harper School of Pandering? I don't know, but it is a good hat. It's a very good hat. Veteran Stadium hat. So anyway, Matvei Michkov, he lands stateside. But the social media blitz doesn't end there, my friends. Oh, no. And this, again, is where I give the Flyers a lot of credit. As soon as that goes out, then they put out the slow motion video of him walking through JFK International Airport. Then there's a news story. Then there's the nameplate. I mean, they really. Then there's him sitting at his stall in the locker room. Or at Skate Zone. And there was actually a funny clip that came out. I'm going to see if I can find it here. But, I mean, if you look at the Flyers timeline the last few days, it's just been nonstop. It's been everywhere. The behind-the-scenes video, him going into the gym. Like, here, we'll pull this up while I'm, complaining, talking. So, Michkov, stateside, everyone's excited. And they should be. I brought this up not that long ago, but Michkov is easily the most highly touted prospect that the Flyers have had since Lindros. I don't think that Claude Giroux was as highly touted. I don't think that people were ready to put the entire organization's future on Claude Giroux's shoulders. Now, where you land on Claude Giroux and how important he was and how good he was and all that doesn't really matter. When you think of a transcendent prospect, or at least one that the organization is trying to sell you as such, Michkov's on a totally different level. Now, social media is different, and the way that social media was being utilized when Claude Giroux was a rookie, different. But they haven't rolled out this kind of red carpet. They haven't gone with this full media blitz in the same way that they have done this week for Michkov. Now, in fairness, they should be. Matvei Michkov coming over is the most intriguing thing to happen to the Flyers in at least a decade. Like, seriously, if we went back to the year 2010, obviously the fluke Stanley Cup final run, you qualified on the last day, went on a magical run, came back from 0-3 down, all that was a great run. But if we think about from 2010 on, it's just a lot of weird memories. It's a lot of weird, strange, disappointing failures and unfortunate injuries. Chris Pronger losing his career, taking that shot to the eye, all the concussions. All right, that one stands out. Nolan Patrick, you get the number 2 pick in the draft. Concussions, career done. A lot of mediocre at best teams. A lot of years where 2 of your best players, Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek, were more facilitators than actual scorers. I also glossed over the fact that shortly after the run to the Cup, the team traded away the captain Mike Richards and their best sniper, Jeff Carter. Those are just a few of the things that happened. And then you fast forward a few more years, Ron Hextall gets installed, and we're going to rebuild. We're going to do this thing the right way. It's going to take time. It might be painful, but we're going to do it the right way. And it was kind of like, I don't know, music to my ears, probably music to a lot of people's ears, because if you're my age, if you're in your early 30s, you haven't really gotten to experience a lot of very good hockey. It was a lot of kind of how do we stay in hockey purgatory? How do we remain competitive in the salary cap era, but then like not actually make ourselves into a cup contender? So Hextall's plan seemed to be a smart one. And some people compared it to Sam Hinkie's plan with the Sixers. And they're not the same thing because, as we've said a bunch of times, it's a totally different process to try to get a high-end player in the NBA and the impact that that player could even make on day one in the league versus a league like the NHL where you draft a kid and you hope that in 3 or 4 years he's going to develop into something. Or if he is the first pick in the draft, maybe he'll play in the league that year, but you don't expect him to be a generational talent or to have the same kind of impact that a LeBron could have had. Like Connor Bedard, generational prospect, had a really nice season, lost a lot of time due to injury, but very good impact player. When Connor McDavid came into the league, same thing. When Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin came into the league, same thing. I have this little bit of fear, though, that the Flyers are kind of putting a little bit too much pressure on Matvei Michkov. They're not explicitly saying that we think he's going to be Connor Bedard or that he's going to be Alex Ovechkin. But a lot of what they're doing and a lot of their potential success down the road is going to be directly tied to whatever Matvei Michkov is going to be. That is, I don't even think that's up for debate. So with that in mind, this is great. Him being stateside is a really good thing. And the cool soundbite, I guess, that came out of it was that Michkov, as soon as he got to the training center, as soon as he got to skate zone, said that he wanted to get on the ice, but the ice was being used by a hockey league. I think it was, it might have been a sled league. And so he couldn't get on the ice, but he went to the training room and then he went and found a net and he just started putting shots on a net. And then at his press conference, his introductory press conference, it was noted that he had since gotten on the ice. And like I said, the Flyers, they're doing a good job of putting that out on social media. They're putting everything they possibly can. But I do have legitimate concerns that the expectations on this kid are going to be a lot higher than they probably should be. And I think he's going to be a really good player. And the hope, obviously, is that he's going to be a 40-goal scorer. At his size, playing wing, your hope is that he has to be 40-goal plus potential. He can't be the number 7 pick in the draft, would have been the number 2 pick in the draft, and then he only turns out to be a 30-goal scorer. You can't have what is considered to be your potentially generational prospect or your potential backbone of your team going forward, the face of this rebuild. He can't amount to the same ceiling of a Travis Konecny, who's a very good player, but is not that kind of player. Travis Konecny wasn't drafted to be generational talent, backbone of the team. Michkov is. And it's been reiterated many times now that Michkov does have a certain kind of importance that, quite frankly, a lot of guys who've been drafted to this team haven't had. There's a certain kind of burden on him. And it's going to be the Flyers' responsibility to make sure that the expectations are reined in. The messaging to the fan base between Danny Briere and Keith Jones and the leaders on the team is going to have to be that, like, this kid is coming in to help us win a lot of games. But he's not our savior. That's really important. Now, I believe I found the clip of John Clark. He didn't make it to JFK International, but he did make it to Skate Zone, where he intercepted Matvei Michkov, and there was a really funny interaction between Michkov and John Clark, and we're going to get into that in a second. But here is Matvei Michkov getting his first taste of the Philly media.
Happy to be here.
Привет.
Thank you. Привет.
Okay, so why do I find it funny? Well, if you listened to Snow the Goalie last night, I kind of laughed about the fact that Michkov turns around, looks at John Clark, looks at any of the other media, because I believe the Flyers had their camera team out there. And he says, happy to be a Flyer. And then John Clark says, Privyet. And I think that John Clark thought that meant thank you. Like, thank you for the comment. But Privyet means hi. Spasiba is thank you. So as a language guy, I thought that was kind of funny. Because the order of operations was, I'm happy to be a flyer. Hi! Hi. Anyway, Matvei Michkov, he's here. Expectations might be high. We'll get back to him, I'm sure, plenty this year on this show and on Snow the Goalie. Now, I'm going to get over to the comments, and then we're going to talk about Konecny's extension. Landros2 says, great rebuild, Flyers style. I think he's talking about Konecny, which we're going to get to here in a second. Andrew Fawcett says, Snow the Goalie can become 3 drunk uncles arguing at the family reunion. That's part of, I will tell you that when we first started doing that show with Bundy, I was sure that there was good chemistry between the 3 of us, but I wasn't sure if Bundy really liked us or not. Like, in the very beginning. I was like, I don't know, does this guy really want to have to deal with this? Like, we're just a bunch of jamokes, Like, do we really matter? And over the past year especially, I've been like, this poor guy actually does like us and consider us friends. If we had told Bundy in his playing days, someday you're going to work in TV, work on the radio, and then on a podcast with a writer and some dopey podcast host. I can think of what he would have said. It would have been very colorful. Sean C. says, if all goes well with Michkov, the Flyers will have 3 players with AAVs between 7.5 and possibly 9.5 in 5 to 6 years, a.k.a. their projected window to compete for a cup. Something to ponder. This is why it's complicated to give out some of the contracts that the Flyers have been giving out in recent years. You look at a Travis Sanheim. You look at this new deal to Konecny. You look at what you will have to pay Michkov, assuming he ends up becoming what you want him to be. All right, let's see. Landro says the only positive is they do need guys for him to play with. And that really becomes the next level of this, is who's going to play with Michkov. Because you've now signed Travis Konecny to a massive deal. You're not going to make him your second-line right wing. There have been some people questioning if they're going to try to turn Michkov into a center because he played there a little bit in the KHL. They were trying to experiment with it. I don't think they view him as a center. If he ends up being a center and he can also somehow be a sniper and a center at the same time, if he can be the goal-scoring threat that like Sam Reinhart is, then by all means. But I don't think so. I think they're going to have him play on the second line. But then you are going to potentially put him with John Tortorella's least favorite player, potentially, Morgan Frost. I don't know how that works. That's going to be a fun dynamic, by the way. If Torts benches Matvei Michkov this year, there's going to be chaos. There's going to be all kinds of heat. Let's see. Andrew says, love how Michkov wanted to skate Tuesday and they told him no. Yeah, because the rink was occupied. Sean says he's impressed by the way that Matvei carries himself. He clearly understood a lot of what was being said at the presser, judging by his sly smiles and laughs. So it's a fluency thing. We can talk about that in a second. Sean also says that as a weirdo that checks Instagram too often, his Instagram game is A+, literally instantly following the current roster players and prospects. He also did the tease. I think it was on Tuesday's show, is when we didn't know for sure if he was going to land that day. And he was like, what's next? While sitting in first class on a plane. He knew. He knew it was up. Landros is right here, by the way. Hopefully they do a better job of building around Michkov than they did with Giroux. They have to. I mean, you certainly have to hope that they're able to put together a more cohesive roster. It'll probably help. You can't have your 2 best players be facilitators. That's what I was saying before about Giroux and Voracek. Neither of them had the killer instinct or had the desire to put the puck on net. Giroux would do it like very, very hesitantly. He almost like lamented having to shoot. I think in his ideal world, he never would have had to score more than 10 goals in a season, and he could have just been the lead facilitator, but they never had very talented wings. He never had a sniper to play with. His best year, I would still argue that one of his best years as a Flyer was when Jaromir Jagr was here, because Jagr knew it was up, even though he was an old man at the time. Andrew, no, I'm not drinking pre-workout. That's just water in a shaker bottle that I could turn into protein shakes. Let's see. I want to go to the next thing, which is Travis Konecny's contract, because that to me is the real problem. And BJ kind of sets the table here. I bet TK trade rumors start next June before the no trade kicks in. We got to talk about this. So Matvei Michkov comes stateside. Everybody's feeling great. Then the word comes out on Thursday. Travis Sanheim actually is the one who broke the news in actually a really funny way. Travis Sanheim goes on Twitter and says that he's hearing that Travis Konecny isn't going anywhere as he's close to signing an extension with the Flyers. And you go, like, just to hear that, to read it on the surface, you're like, oh, well, I mean, he probably would know, they're friends. But his tweet is perfection. Sources say Flyers forward Travis Konecny isn't going anywhere as the 27-year-old is closing in on an extension to stay in Philly. My source, and it points down to this picture of Konecny making a priceless face. So Sanheim breaks that story. The Flyers quote tweet it. Fine. So then we all start scrambling because then it's a matter of, all right, well, what's the contract going to look like? For those of you who might have been new or might not have been aware of what's been going on, the initial ask from the Travis Konecny camp was over $10 million, reportedly. And the Flyers wanted to keep it closer to $8 million. So then you do your negotiating and you say, all right, well, if one starts at 10, one starts at 8, you try to meet in the middle around 9. My contention this whole time has been he's probably around an $8 million player. Some will argue 7.5. I'd say that he's around an $8 million player. The one thing that the Flyers had working against them in this negotiation is the fact that the salary cap is about to go up. And the assumption is that because of the new TV rights deals, the cap will go up every year for at least the next few years. And that the percentage of the cap that Travis Konecny's AAV is going to count against is going to be lower every year. As the cap grows, if that number stays flat, if his contract stays flat, it's a lower percentage of the total cap, which is fine. But I always come back to just because you have more money to spend doesn't mean that you need to, or just because another team might be willing to overpay doesn't mean you have to. And I have, for better or worse, I've said, I think Travis Konecny is a really good player, and I think that he's been a very good player on a very bad team, and that he has not been a locker room problem. There haven't been rumors about him becoming a malcontent. He's done what has been asked of him as a player, and as a leader on this team, they put an A on his sweater. But my issue has been that if you really are doing the rebuild, and the rebuild is we are going to try to somewhat bottom out here to get at least one more top 5, top 3 pick to go along with Matvei Michkov, because that's where all of the elite talent typically lives. Konecny prevents you from getting that bad. Sean Couturier, if he's healthy, prevents you from getting that bad. John Tortorella, because of his ability to raise the floor of a bad team, prevents you from getting that bad. But if you start to remove some of the elements, then you are able to put yourself in a position where you're not actively trying to lose. You're not telling the players to lose. You're not telling Tortorella that you have to go out and lose because that will never work. But if you take some of the tools out of the toolbox, it's harder to do the job. So if you were trying to bottom this thing out and get another legit, maybe generational prospect to go with Matvei Michkov, trading Travis Konecny made all the sense in the world. It was going to potentially get you additional draft picks. It could have gotten you another change of scenery guy, like the Giroux trade netted Owen Tippett. But instead, it became very clear that the Flyers wanted to bring back Konecny, who, again, good player, very good player on a bad team. Would he be a very, very good player or a next-level player on a very good team? I don't know. If you plopped him onto Boston, would he all of a sudden become a 40-goal scorer? I'm not so sure. Would he become a 90-point guy? I'm not so sure. There's only one way to know, and we can't know because he has locked up. He's been locked up here. He has chosen to remain in Philadelphia to try to compete for a Stanley Cup. And it's interesting because when Michkov, when it was confirmed that he was going to be coming over early, all of a sudden I think that took a little bit of the negotiating leverage away from Konecny's camp. Because the thought is, the number 7 overall pick, who could have been the number 2 pick in another draft, is going to be here. They play the same position. He's going to probably get some top-line minutes. Clearly, the plan is going to be that eventually he's going to be your top-line right wing. And unfortunately for Travis Konecny, the rumors of Michkov coming over also happened to come in the year that they were looking to do this extension, and they had been working on it since the trade deadline this year. Another thing that might have worked against Konecny was the Sam Reinhart deal, where you had a guy who scored 67 goals across the regular season and the postseason, who took, I think it was 8.5. Now, he's playing in Florida, and there's tons of tax perks, so it looks like a very below-market deal, but when you factor in the taxes, it's not a bad deal. I still think that the Players Association is probably pissed at Sam Reinhart that he didn't at least go for 9.5. You have to raise that ceiling, but as the cap goes up, bad players are going to get a lot of money, and good players are going to get quite a bit of money, and great players are going to get absurd amounts of money. Now, Travis Konecny was probably that $8-ish million guy. I was afraid of the term because I just go by stature, right? Sean Couturier, big dude, all right? Most people to me look big because I'm short, right? Couturier, big dude. Had it not been for multiple back injuries, would have probably been a Selke finalist again last year. Rasmus Ristolainen, legitimate giant. Travis Sanheim, who added bulk, legitimately big human being. Travis Konecny's not that. Travis Konecny's my size. He might be an inch taller than me. We might weigh the same. My, dad bod, man boobs are probably more muscle with Travis Konecny. He's in significantly better shape than I am. But I know how I feel at 33. Konechny's 27. Do I think that in year 6 of the contract, when he's waking up every day, he has 2 little kids, do I think he's going to feel as good as he does at 27? Probably not. Do I think that with the style of play that he goes into every game with, reckless abandon, he's going to be able to hold up for an 8-year contract? I don't. So I was afraid of the term, and the money is the thing that I kept losing my mind on. I was like, there's no way. You can't go into a season, into a negotiation and say $10 million a year for Travis Konecny. I said, there's no way that the organization could sell that, especially after the Reinhart deal. There's no chance. So the contract came out on Thursday, 8 years, $70 million, and 8.75 AAV. And I was doing Crossing Broadcast at the time. And so my initial reaction was, all right, the money is okay. It's not horrific. I didn't want to see them get to the 9 million number. I didn't want to see them go above the $9 million mark. But 8.75 I could rationalize. And the reason I could rationalize it is, if he is a 30-goal scorer, then there are teams that would trade for an $8.75 million cap hit 2 years from now to get a 30-goal scorer. Because in theory, as the cap goes up, that kind of player might end up costing close to $9.5 or $10 million. It's entirely possible. You have to remember, the market is going to reset as the cap goes up. So I thought to myself, all right, $8.75 million, I might not love the deal, but if Michkov doesn't turn into what you think he's going to, or if your rebuild catches a snag, hits a snag for some reason, and you decide 2 years from now we have to hit this, we have to hit a hard reset, like the team isn't developing like it's supposed to, we're going to continue to build around Michkov, but like we need to jettison the final guys from the last, core, which would be Konecny, it would be Sanheim, it would be Lawton. If 2 years from now they decide it's time to blow it up, they would have a player on a pretty, I think, attractive contract at that point. So it wasn't even that bad. Wasn't even that upset. However, there's a part of the contract that is significantly bad. There's a part of the contract that I just don't understand. The Flyers will tell you that it's a new era of orange, and the Flyers will tell you that they are trying to do a rebuild, not a retool, but their actions don't exactly line up all the time. Sure, they haven't added significant talent this offseason in free agency, but what did they do? They drafted in hockey purgatory because they got enamored with the idea of making the playoffs at the end of last year, even though we all knew That wasn't a good thing. So they picked in hockey purgatory. They rushed to re-sign Garnet Hathaway, who's a good bottom six forward, and Eric Johnson, who I guess they think is going to bring veteran leadership to be the seventh defenseman. They rushed to re-sign those guys. And they did add talent. They brought Matvei Michkov over, which is great. But then they handed out a contract that Chuck Fletcher would have handed out. They handed out this $8.75 million deal with a 6-year no movement clause. I mean, it's almost this feels like when Chuck Fletcher gave a big money deal with a no movement clause to Travis Sanheim. We all sat back and went, what the hell are you doing? 6 years, full no movement clause, and then a 2-year limited no trade clause for the final 2 years of this 8-year deal. That's horrific business. It's not even conceivable that if Travis Konecny had gotten a market, that he would have gotten a 6-year no movement clause. Now, you can make the argument, if you want to, I think you're wrong, you can make the argument, well, we, quote unquote, we, the Flyers fandom, should be grateful and feel lucky to have a player like Travis Konecny who's committed to playing here. Yes, sure, fine. No qualms. He could have waited until next year and tested free agency, and maybe he would have left. It's entirely possible. But a 6-year no movement clause is absolutely insane. Like, you have absolutely tied yourself in knots. Like, one, on the term and on the money. It's still significant money. It's still a significant enough percent of your cap right now as you're a rebuilding team. And it is a number that you have locked into place for the next 8 years. Not this year, right? It goes into effect for the 25-26 season. But for 8 years, you have him eating up almost $9 million of cap for a guy who is not a 75, 80-point producer, for a guy who has not scored 40 goals in a season. That's a lot of money to tie up while you're saying we're trying to rebuild. You already have a guy like Travis Sanheim here, locked in long-term on a contract that has a lot of money and has a no-movement clause. You are limiting your flexibility as a front office. Now, if the argument is we would have had to give Travis Konecny $9.5 million, $9.75 million to not have the no movement clause or to reduce that no movement clause to 3 years. Would you have rathered that, Russ? No, I wouldn't. I would have said fucking trade the guy. That's what I would have said. Because he's not a $9.75 million player, but he's also not a guy that you should be handing out a 6-year no movement clause to. He's not a generational talent. He's a very good player. But if you're trying to rebuild, you need to have flexibility. They have taken away their own flexibility. Now, sure, it's entirely possible that Konecny, 2 years from now, if things aren't going the way they're supposed to, maybe he'll just want to be out. And maybe a team like a Boston will be looking to add a player because they're looking to try to make themselves a contender again. And Konecny says, fine, I'll go to Boston. And it doesn't matter. No movement clause doesn't mean that he is unmovable. He just has to approve it. However, there is a possibility here that this rebuild doesn't go according to plan, and 2 years from now you want to trade him, and he pulls a Claude Giroux and says, I will only go to Colorado, or I will only go to New York. Then what do? Then do you come back and say, well,
At least we saved the $750,000 a year. At least we saved that money on the cap because we gave him a 6-year no movement clause.
that's insane. It's bad business. And no one can convince me otherwise. I'm actually a little bit sad that we're not in the midst of hockey season because I would have absolutely loved to have had a little chat with Keith Jones and Danny Briere because pretty much every home game, they come up the elevator, they walk by, sometimes we chitty-chat a little bit. If I say something that's a little bit outlandish, it might not be them who says it, but somebody will get word back to me that they thought something was outlandish. I've never had to retract those, so that's always nice. It's the beauty of that contract, the beauty of that partnership, of maintaining our ability to be critical and have creative control. It's a beautiful thing. Thanks, Hulk Hogan. Creative control doesn't work for me, brother. It's bad business. The only way that a 6-year no movement clause makes sense is because you really do think that Travis Konecny is going to be a vital part of your rebuild and about turning this team into a cup contender. He's 27 right now. By year 4, he will be 31. That is when most people, I think, expect whatever this version of the Flyers are to become maybe a team that is in the playoffs consistently and is a number 1 defenseman away from being a cup contender. 31 isn't old. 31 is not your prime. And at his size and with his playing style, it is more likely than not that this isn't going to work. And I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I could be wrong. The thing that obviously changes everything is if Michkov this year becomes a 30-goal scorer as a rookie, right? Or if Michkov becomes a guy who really does change the entire view of what this team is, and all of a sudden free agents decide that they want to play here because they can see what the Flyers are building, then fine. But if that happens, if Michkov becomes that guy and this becomes another bubble playoff team, they're not getting the top-end talent. Then once again, it falls all on Michkov to be the generational talent, and they haven't done enough to surround him with elite talent yet. It's maybe the one drawback to Michkov coming over this year, to him coming over early, is that he does add actual talent by him being in the lineup. He does actively make your team better. If you want to do a 1-for-1 swap, he is exponentially better and more impactful than Cam Atkinson was last year. So while you didn't add a lot of talent, and while you didn't replace Sean Walker, it's iffy. I just don't see it. I don't see where this contract made sense. The no movement clause, if it hadn't been in there, I'd have said good bit of business by the Philadelphia Flyers. Decent enough. All right, I'm going to go over to the comments here because there's a lot. There are many, many comments. Landra says the Flyers were never looking to get bad. They're just skipping the bad part of a rebuild. Andrew Fawcett asks, strange thought, could TK rub off on Michkov and turn him into a bit of a rat too? It's possible. I think that if we are going with the idea of Konecny as a leader, I do think that he'll probably take Michkov under his wing. That's what the expectation should be. If you have a letter on your sweater, you should be a mentor to the highly touted prospect, even though he's kind of coming for your job. Now, is it possible that they could move Konecny to left wing? Could you get to a point this season where Konechny's on the left wing, Couturier is in the center, and Michkov's on the right wing, and that's your first line? It's possible. With the way that coaches juggle lineups, it's entirely possible that we could see it at some point this year. I think that they're still going to try to shelter, and I say shelter very haphazardly. They might try to have Michkov play on the second line with Morgan Frost to not put as much pressure. But it's still going to matter. There's still going to be meaningful minutes. Jay Grebby says, love TK, but bewildered they think he fits their timeline when they still have no 1C or 1D in the system. And that is true. That's actually where the pick of Jet Lashenko is even weirder when you had Buyam on the board, who projected to potentially be a 1D. To me, that says that they really think that Cam York is going to develop into something, that they might think that Oliver Bonk is going to develop into something. But man, I don't have my money on either of those guys becoming a legitimate 1D. And no, they certainly do not have a 1C in the system. That almost feels like they're going to have to try to go out, and that'll have to be their free agent splash in a year or two. But you need to have a guy who can get Michkov the puck in an advantageous position to maximize his talent. They don't have that right now. Couturier is a very good two-way forward when he's healthy, but when he's healthy, he's doing a lot of the lifting, a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Joe Papel thinks that as long as Konecny doesn't get hurt, the contract will prove to be good value. Jay Grebby thinks that it seems like the Flyers fell in love with their players. If you remember to last trade deadline, I think it was Tortorella's the one who said, we can't fall in love with our players, we have to make tough decisions. They traded Sean Walker, but that was it. They didn't trade Scott Laughton. They've had multiple opportunities in the last 18 months to trade Scott Laughton, who's a wonderful enough player for what he is, but is not a cornerstone of your team and certainly doesn't fit the timeline. This is where we're at. Andrew agrees with Jay, by the way. They went from having a team of players with playmakers to having a couple of scorers with no one to dish it. Landros thinks that it's a slight overpay, even though he's their best team or their best player on the team. Gabe checks in over on YouTube and says it handicaps your ability later down the line. That's the problem. I think the no movement clause is the real issue here. I don't even think it's the term. And like I said, I think the money ends up being okay. The no movement clause is insane. Joe mentions the fact that no movement clauses get waived all the time. They do, but the thing is, as an organization, you have to be you want to have the ability to do it. And I come back to this. Konecny has young kids. He talked about his family. For them, it was a no-brainer to re-sign here. And I wish him all the best. And I can tell you that as somebody who has young kids, I wouldn't want my employer to be the one who gets to dictate if I have to relocate across the country or relocate north of the border. I totally get that. And maybe that was a big part of why the no movement clause was so important, because they have a young family and they just don't want to get blindsided. And if that's the case, I don't blame him. But I can say that from the Flyers' perspective, it should have probably been 3 years, not 6. There's no reason to go to 6. That's insane. Let's see. Pleased Samurai over on X says, hockey purgatory. No. There's a chance that that's where you're going to be. BJ missed Snow the goalie yesterday. Was the no movement clause negotiated to reduce AAV to sub 9? That's my guess. I think so. I mean, listen, if the Flyers had given a no movement clause, had given no movement clause, if there had been I keep saying no. If there hadn't been a no movement clause in this contract, Konecny probably was going to get 9.5, which would have been bad business. That is actually where I think that it becomes an albatross of a contract potentially. But I think the no movement thing is actually a bigger deal now. Let's see. Please Samurai says, however, does this signing send a message to all the young guns? If you do all the right things, this is what you can achieve. $70 million. Kind of like having an eye to Brink and Farabee, Michkov, Forster, York. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I think it shows you that, if you play the role that you're supposed to, and if you are an important player, you do all the right things, you're not a malcontent, even when the team is bad, you can get to that point. I still don't know what Farabee's future is here. He's come up in a bunch of trade conversations. He's been a guy that other teams have been interested in. I don't know what his future looks like. Frost is the same way. Bonk was a good player last year. He caught them off guard with how ready he was, but I'm not entirely sure what he's going to be. Let's see. Please Samurai asks, how are we going to get Higgins or Roger McQueen next year? That's what we need. They need to make it happen. They need to start selling off other parts. BJ said earlier that the no movement clause doesn't go into effect until next year. Is it possible that they could try to trade him in the next year? They're not going to. I see almost no scenario where they trade Konecny after giving him that no movement clause. To me, that actually feels scummy. If the Flyers truly think there's any possibility that they're going to want to trade him in the next year, you shouldn't have given him a 6-year no movement clause. Because if his main rationale was, I don't want my family blindsided, and then 6 months from now, you blindside him and his family and you trade him, that's a pretty shitty thing to do. And I will be very happy to call it out as a very shitty thing to do if that were to come to pass. I don't think that's what this is. I think you've essentially given him a 7-year no movement, because I just don't see a scenario where they trade him now. Scott Lawton, though, trade him. Joel Farabee, if there's a good package out there, trade him. Morgan Frost, if there's a good package out there, trade him. Sean Couturier, if you're running into issues with him being healthy or not, sit him. Don't let him play through things next year. It is going to make your team worse. You can't tell Torts and the players go out and actively try to lose games. But as I said before, you can take tools out of the toolbox and make the job harder to do. All right, I'm just looking to see really quick if there's anything else. Rob Greeley says, at least Sealer didn't rob the bank. Could have had 2 large contracts to deal with. No, but he got more than he should have. He's a third-pair defenseman. You can get third-pair defenseman for $700,000. I think he got too much money. I think Nick Seeler looked a lot better because Sean Walker was a really good defenseman next to him. And I think what you're going to see is Seeler get exposed this year. That's what I think. I could be wrong. I'm not, but I could be wrong. I think you're going to have a lot of people this year who are going to watch Nick Seeler play. He's going to give you all the same heart and fights and all that, but he's not going to look to be as good of a player because Walker was just a very good, a good defensive pairing. He was a good partner for Seeler. Landers thinks that a healthy Drysdale will surprise. I don't think he will be this year after that surgery. I think that Drysdale is going to take months to get back to full health. And that actually is where we come back to the idea of the elite talent thing. Drysdale's a good player. He's not what I think Cutter Gauthier is going to be. I think Gauthier is going to haunt the Flyers. I'm pretty confident. Drysdale, as long as he becomes a legitimate quarterback on the power play, on PP1, the value of the deal won't look that bad of the trade. But if Gauthier as a rookie becomes like a 30-goal scorer, you're going to look fucking dumb for not figuring out how to make the guy happy. And if it really did come down to you weren't willing to guarantee him the opportunity to compete for a job last year or to play a few games for your team when his college season was over and burn a year of the ELC, if that's ultimately what cost you the opportunity to have Gauthier, if he becomes a 30-goal scorer as a rookie, then you messed up, and you messed up big time. Let's see. Is there anything else here before we move on off the Flyers? There are a lot of things going on in the comments. I think we're good. Gabe also agrees that Seeler is going to regress. BJ says that Richards and Carter were both traded before the no movement kicked in. Sanheim would have been. That is true. Torrey Krug used his no movement clause to block that deal. If Konecny scores 30, his value might be high if the cap rises and he has a reasonable AAV. I just don't see it. I really don't. I think that they view Konecny in a totally different way than they do the other guys. And I think that by the time the Flyers were ready to trade Richards and Carter, they had been ready for a while to trade those guys. And so it didn't matter. All right. Let's move on to the last two things today. And we have to do it quick because I now have to get ready for a call for work. But two things. One, Joel Embiid went on Drew Hanlon's show. Yes, the former Markelle Fultz trainer. Might still be his trainer. I don't know. I don't care to know. Joel Embiid had a few very interesting comments, and most notably said that he hasn't had the opportunity to play on a super team before, and that he also believes that he's the most hated player in the NBA, but he doesn't know why. Now, we're going to avoid the last one about why he might be the most hated player. I totally get it. If I were not a Philadelphia 76ers fan, I probably wouldn't like Joel Embiid either. He is a foul merchant. He is a guy who constantly complains on the court about not getting calls, despite the fact that he probably gets more foul calls than anyone else. I will also acknowledge at the same point, Embiid is a massive human being, a very strong human being, and he is going to get fouled hard the same way that Shaq got fouled hard. But the super team comment was interesting. And he is right. He's never really gotten to play on a team that's had a legitimate big three. Even if you go back to when Jimmy Butler had a very limited run here, there wasn't really a big three. Like Ben Simmons wouldn't have been considered a big three. And when Fultz was drafted and you had Embiid and Simmons and Fultz, that was kind of like, hey, this could develop into a big three, but it wasn't viewed as we have three legitimate stars now who are ready to potentially win the NBA Finals. He kind of has that for the first time in his career now. Like Paul George comes in with far more of a league-wide acceptance of being a star player than anyone has in Joel Embiid's tenure, with the exception of Jimmy Butler. Tyrese Maxey has now gone out and shown you that he can be a legitimate star player in this league and can do so at a very young age. So he is right. Like, he didn't get to play with a super team before, but this year is very much setting up for him to be part of a legitimate big three and for the Sixers to actually have what is sort of like a super team, although, you know, you have to fill out a roster. They have some good players. They added Drummond. They added Gordon. They just added Reggie Jackson. So we have a guy with goggles playing on the team. That's great. They brought back Kyle Lowry. Team's good. Is it a super team? I'm not sure. But now, like, there is actually going to be criticism. Like, where Joel Embiid has been able to get by a few years in his career with the team around him isn't very good, he won't get away with that this year. If he doesn't perform, he will get called on it. If Paul George doesn't perform, he will get called on it. If Tyrese Maxey regresses, he will get called on it. The expectations that Joel Embiid has had to go through his career with as a member of the Philadelphia 76ers have been around here. They've probably been about a 4. They're about to be at least a 7. Because this is the first time there won't be an excuse that he doesn't have skill or stars around him. Sean C. says, if Embiid had been 10% more effective in Game 5 against Toronto in 2019, the Sixers win that series. Instead, he played like shit and claimed he was sick. That was the gastroenteritis game, which kind of became a running joke. We'll come back to Embiid at some point here. The Olympics are going to be starting up, and we'll see how he performs, and we'll see how the U.S. team performs when the games matter, and we'll see if they're going to allow teams like South Sudan to remain very competitive, or if they're going to start to blow the doors off teams. You have to hope that it's the latter. Now, the final thing that I want to point out is Eagles training camp started this week. We talked about this on Tuesday. The camp was opening, but the first practice wasn't until Wednesday. Training camp has been interesting so far, and we're going to dive into it more next week. But we have already gotten to the point where I'm ready to scream and to deactivate X because my feed has been inundated with beat writers with the same tweets about the same tracking of Jalen Hurts passes or about little camp notes as things are going. You're getting little video clips. I think the video clips are actually okay. All things considered, those are fine. Those make you, I guess, feel like you're there, you have a better understanding. But man, the tracking of the stats drives me absolutely batshit crazy. And it's only going to get worse. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week. There have also been some questions about some of the Jalen Hurts comments this week, that it doesn't seem like he's being effusive in his praise of Nick Sirianni, that issue that some people wanted to make it into earlier in the offseason may continue. And if the Eagles are going to be able to actually compete for a Super Bowl, if their head coach and their starting quarterback aren't on the same page, I don't want to take a couple of days and a couple of quotes and turn them into a big thing. So we're gonna recap. We're gonna come back to this on Tuesday, and I'll give you a better idea of if I think things are going the wrong direction or not. But until then, we are done for today. I want to thank everybody who joined me live on YouTube, on X, and on Facebook. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Go subscribe to the Russ Joy Show on YouTube. Hit the like button. That is critical. Seriously, it is so helpful with this weird algorithm that I don't understand. Hit the like button. It's very helpful. If you comment on the video live, that's great. If you want to go back in after the fact and comment down in the regular comment section as well, that also apparently helps the show get found by other fans and by other sports fans and other people in the Philly area. So please do that as well. Hit that thumbs up, like the video, share the video, subscribe. And if you're a podcast listener, if you're listening after the fact, you can still go over to YouTube and like the video and all that. And it's still helpful. Share this with 2 people in your life. Share it with a few, listen, almost all of us have a group chat, right? With Philly sports fans. Share an episode. Put in a good word for your guy, Russ. Tries to bring a little bit of joy to your life every Tuesday and Friday morning at or around 8 a.m. We're getting closer to this thing starting on time, right at 8. So anyway, you can follow me on Twitter at JoyOnBroad. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. And for now, that's the end of today's Russ Joy Show. I will be back on Tuesday. Everybody have a great weekend, and I will talk to all of you